So we're back. We're actually going to talk a little bit about the second half of recruitment and retention. We're going to refer to retention, and honestly, Jeff touched on a lot of things, I think, in his last presentation that's very similar to what we do in retention. So we'll kind of piggyback on some of his information as well. Hang on for just a second. So, sorry about that. So oftentimes, retention can be overlooked when one is developing their recruitment plan, but compliance and retention are critical to the success of clinical trials.
So this was an analysis done by Beth Harper of the Clinical Performance Partners, and what this is, she referred to this as, is the leaky pipe analysis. And the idea is that if you had 100 patients who are identified for your study through pre-screening, consenting, and randomization, only 7 of those 100 people are actually going to complete your trial. So it's something to really keep in mind when you're starting to look at your recruitment and your retention. How do you maintain those 7 people? And though it is the patient's right to drop out of a trial at any time for any reason, and this should be thoroughly explained to them during the informed consent process, there are definitely some reasons patients cite as why they can discontinue study participation. Inconvenience is a large part of why patients drop out of the clinical trials. If the study site maybe is far from the patient's home or workplace, if there are multiple site visits involved, and if the scheduling of appointments does not fit within their routine, they may drop out. So about 85% of participants of studies fail to retain enough patients, and 30% is the average dropout rate.
So some of the consequences of dropouts, we can have things that are serious, ranging from costly delays to missing data that can compromise the results and integrity of the study, as well as one of the most devastating to everyone involved would be termination of the trial. So taking a look at this slide, you can see some of the many common reasons that dropout occurs. There are multiple factors that can play a role, but just as many times the participant simply has changed their mind about participating. Whatever things come up, life happens. We understand that. But some of these factors are external, others can be prevented. So let's face it. I think somebody also mentioned, as we all know firsthand how difficult it is to get around Columbus and the campus here in general. We've got one-way streets, we've got construction, detours, lack of parking. That can all add up to participants' burden and lead to an early dropout. When planning for your study, some of the solutions to these issues are, So we would like to try and have you utilize easier to get to locations. So we know that Ohio State is currently in the process of building some outpatient clinics in outlying areas. So possibly consider using one of those to reach your participants. So we can also consider off-peak times. So you might want to try having your folks come in possibly on the weekends. It might be easier for them. Sometimes evenings are more what's the word I'm looking for? They are actually easier for people to come to rather than trying to do a study in the middle of their workday. Try something scheduled off-peak hours, so after 5 p.m., traditional work hours. You also might consider conducting your study in-home or via phone when possible. So just a little known factoid, in a 2017 survey, it was found that 49% of the respondents expressed that their clinical trial participation disrupted their daily routine. So the takeaway on this is know your audience. The survey also indicated that smartphone apps, concierge services, and home study visits are also the most desired services. So that might be something that you would want to consider, not something that you've normally thought of in the past. Again, your takeaway is that researchers need to consider the differences between participants in relation to their age, background, geographic location, and health status, so that education and engagement efforts can be conducted accordingly. Another common reason for dropout might be financial constraints. In addressing This issue, look for solutions to the problem. So making study visits after normal working hours, like we mentioned. Consider even a lunch hour if it doesn't take too long. Covering the cost of parking, as I know some of you might do, or even in our cases, sometimes offering a garage pass to the participant after they've conducted whatever they were coming in for. Being flexible. So consider your participant. Cash on the spot might be a better incentive than paying at the end of a multiple site visit study. By the way, Gumby's up there because he's flexible. We were struggling. Misunderstood expectations. So, and I think Jeff may have commented on this a little bit. Educating your participants so that they have a better understanding of the process of clinical trials and treatment risks. So, build it into your time with these study participants to explain what your end result is that you're going for. Sometimes they say, I just can't seem to fit all these appointments into my busy schedule, and they are saying that we, as researchers, are expecting so much of them. So we try and make things a little bit easier. Again, the easier it is, the more likely you're going to retain them in your study. Sorry about that. More than double the percentage of participants who have dropped out of a study did so because it didn't meet their expectations compared to those who completed it. More than half of the patients who completed a study said it exceeded their expectations. Again, answering questions throughout the process seems to make people more comfortable with what they're doing, what they're going through. Nobody wants a surprise, so.
There are a variety of methods that can be utilized in order to improve the retention rate of participants. Some things you should consider is minimizing the burden during protocol design, setting the expectations up front during informed consent discussions, explaining the importance of participation and what it means for the future of maybe that disease, promptly responding to inquiries and communications. In our office, when we're working with people, we tell them, try to get back to people within 24 to 48 hours. You don't want them just lingering out there. Send reminders for upcoming visits. Provide a comfortable and patient-friendly environment, which we have a speaker talking about a little bit later. Show appreciation and recognition, and accommodate their schedule as much as possible, which is something we've been saying all day.
So what we'd like to do now is just take a little more in-depth look at some of those things that we just had up on the screen. So we're going to start with speaking about protocol design and minimizing the burden during protocol design. So this would be in regard to the participants that are in the study, trying again to keep those site visits to a minimum. So for example, instead of having 4 visits, you might try combining into one visit. So for example, if you want your participant to come in and they need to give a blood sample, and the next one you thought, we're going to have them do a urine sample, and I'm just throwing these off the top of my head, but you might try combining those into one site visit. It might be easier for them to do that, but you get the idea. Try and combine them so they have less opportunity to come down, fight the traffic, pay for the parking, interrupt their day. Greater adoption of convenience-enhancing initiatives and technology can also be important in the retention of participants. So utilizing, I think we may have touched on this as well, utilizing several methods for communication by obtaining multiple phone numbers, so a work, a home number, a cell number, and email addresses for the participants so you can follow up with them easily. We mentioned here phone, text, email, even mail, snail mail. You might have a postcard. I still get them from my dentist just for appointments as a reminder, but as a backup, you might also want to utilize a cell phone, or I also get texts and things like that. So multiple ways so that people don't forget to come to their study visit. Show appreciation and recognition. Sending participants small tokens of appreciation that will remind them of the study. So for example, if you build a relationship with your study participants, you may have gathered some birth date information about them. So send them a birthday card. Offer them a refrigerator magnet. I know That's our jam. We like that at my house. We put those all up over the refrigerators. Pens. People seem to like pens a lot. I go to Huntington Bank for no reason, just so I can steal their pens. Send out newsletters that report the progress of the study, and I know Jeff mentioned this as well. Report research results in formats most useful to the different communities involved, such as participants, families of participants, and referring practitioners. So for the participants, you might want to explain how the findings may ultimately improve their health. And to accommodate the busy schedules of healthcare practitioners, just provide a handout that summarizes the findings more succinctly than possibly a journal publication would.
This graph shows how patients who withdraw from a study compare to those who've completed it. So 38% of those who've dropped out found that site visits were stressful, whereas only 16% of those who completed the study found the site visit stressful. So that's something you definitely need to keep in mind. Coming here is very stressful for people. 89% of those who completed the study, compared to only 64% of those who dropped out, felt that their questions were answered during the informed consent process. So by taking the time during consenting, you increase your rate of people who might complete your study. And 5% of those who dropped out felt that the informed consent process itself was difficult to understand. So I know that we're all talking about simplifying consents, and that's something that you really need to consider, because if people don't understand what they're signing up for, then they're not going to remain in your study.
So just a final thought from us, understanding why a participant chooses to quit a study is valuable information. By soliciting feedback from participants, you will get insight into what changes can be made to improve the participant's experience. So that being said, whether it's a face-to-face conversation that you might have, if somebody tells you that they're no longer interested in participating for whatever reason, that feedback, positive or negative, can be helpful to you. And as always, if you use any of the information or any of our services, we would ask that you cite and submit, because this is through a grant that we offer our services. Does anybody have any questions about recruitment or retention?
Anybody had issues when they're recruiting for studies or having people stay in the study?
Yes.
I have lots of questions. Okay,
You wasn't joking when you said you were come with lots of questions.
we have questions. Okay, so question one. We're getting a new hospital.
Okay.
Has there been consideration of the CCTS to